Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotello Esquire, and Evan Ginsberg, and of course, special guest host, Mike Leno. Do you want to introduce our guest this evening today, Evan Ginsberg?
Absolutely. He is a journalist. He is a filmmaker. He is a wrestling aficionado who is not shy about taking on the major promotions or the fanboys. He is the notorious Mike, Mike Messier. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing good. It's really great to be here with this esteemed panel. All of you guys are pro wrestling aficionados. Evan and I have met several times in person in Connecticut and New York, and I've definitely heard of Mike Leno as well. So, and Russell, it's great to be here with you, and glad to be here with all the fans.
Yeah, Buddy Sotello, that's the one you haven't heard of because you probably don't spend too much time out in the Bay Area. But where we're calling you, where are you located right now?
I'm in Atlantic Beach, Jacksonville, Florida. I was just at the AEW Fan Festival today. I can tell you some stories from that, and I've been going to the AEW live shows, the Dynamite shows, for about since February. And having a good time, and it's let's put it this way, guys. AEW may not be perfect, but it's happening, and it's nice to be in an arena with wrestling matches and a live crowd. So I'm happy to be there because there is something magical about that ring, and despite what the powers that be try to do to destroy that magic, seemingly from the business out, it seems like they try to destroy it sometimes with various reasons. As Evan alludes to, I get upset about it, but there's something magical about those 4 ring posts, 3 sets of ropes, and 2 or more wrestlers competing for a victory.
And go ahead, Evan.
I just wanted to broach this subject. Why is it that the fans seemingly need to be WWE versus AEW? Why can't they enjoy both or pieces of both? Or what? It's almost like 2 rival gangs, and it's really immature and almost obsessive. From my point of view, what's your take on it?
From my point of view, I think pro wrestling is based on conflict, and I think that there's been a lack of good conflict storytelling within the business, especially from the WWE since the Daniel Bryan storyline when he initially won the title at that year's WrestleMania. There's been a basic lack of conflict on television. There's a lot of influences from that. As great as I think the women's division is in WWE, it's stacked with talent. I think some things that how the women were presented on Total Divas sometimes creates a softer touch to the presentation. I think Renee Young, as popular as she is when she was working for WWE, her style of commentary was often to pacify angry wrestlers. They do that now backstage commentators, unlike a Mean Gene Okerlund, who would kind of, oh my goodness, he would kind of provoke conflict. These backstage commentators or interviewers are seemingly trying to diffuse conflict. So I think when there's a lack of conflict on screen, Evan, the fans, like myself, feel the need to rile things up, create the conflict with the smart marks in the Facebook groups, on the Twitter pages, because we're not getting our primal wrestling need met for conflict. We are creating it amongst ourselves.
Interesting. Dr. Mike.
I was going to interject that I think AEW, starting from Tony Khan on down, the guy seems like a really decent person who cares about others and cares about the product he's putting out. And, granted, probably my only gripe about AEW at times, as I've discussed with Bully Ray, Bubba Dudley, is the reffing. And sometimes they'll let guys go forever outside the ring in a non-stips match, and then other times they do the proper counting out stuff. So, and they hand-picked. I mean, I knew a lot of these refs, particularly Rick Knox from Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, which was sort of like the parent that begat AEW. They all were through there. I shot Kenny Omega a million times there, Young Bucks since the start of their careers, Orange Cassidy, etc. there. But from that on down, and they handpicked all like the best available refs, other than Charles Robinson in WWE. I mean, they've got the best foreign talent, international talent. So at least for me, somebody that has to cover this as a photographer, magazine writer and stuff, and then write up reports for Japan. I like both. I mean, I really can't stomach Raw, and now that they've gotten rid of that, after 7 weeks, Adnan, or I forget what his name was, the Burke, the lead play-by-play guy that had no history in wrestling, and now they're going for an MMA guy who, granted, he's done some MMA TV, but he's from Sirius XM primarily. He starts this Monday. It's like they just don't care. It's like if the fans get pissed, and I'm going to ask Mike his thoughts on all I'm spewing out, he doubles down. And again, as I've said a million times on this show and elsewhere, the wrestlers there in WWE are playing to an audience of one, that being Vince. So it's very cool. So I love NXT. It's some of the best wrestling. And I love AEW. The shows remind me of Georgia Championship Wrestling. Just a wealth of talent. You don't know who's going to come in and out. There's always surprises. It's my favorite show each and every week. How?
I think one of the things is that we had it built into us or burned into the consciousness of wrestling fans from the territory days that my territory is better than your territory, and my federation is better than your federation. And it's not that. Even growing up, there were people who were.
I don't think people knew about other territories. There were very few of us. Napolitano, Bill Apter, and myself traveling around. It really wasn't that way unless you had a territory war like Detroit, Montreal,
No, but I'm saying that transformed into the AWA versus the NWA versus the WWF. People chose sides there, and then there's still this sort of need to say that my Fed is better than your Fed kind of thing. So the WWF solid fanboys are going to always spit on AEW. And then AEW fans feel like they have to respond in kind.
Right, a lot of them were, as Mike can probably attest, they were probably TiVoing NXT on the Wednesday nights. Now you see they're on separate nights, and AEW won that war. NXT is producing even better shows now that they don't have to fret about being beaten every week by AEW in the ratings, which is sort of the measuring stick for I don't know how many years, dating back to the Monday Night Wars. But Mike, I'm assuming you're going to the pay-per-view tomorrow.
Yeah.
How was last night and everything? Because this looks like a fun weekend. I bet tons of people from all over that were able to come, maybe not outside the U.S., are there.
Well, I called an audible last night because I actually went to the baseball game across the parking lot from AEW. I was at the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp, and when I got back to my car, I could hear Justin Roberts announce Hangman Page had won a match. So that's all I know from last night. I had the baseball ticket in hand, and just the way that the tickets have been working for AEW, I've been kind of like a preferred or a regular customer since February, but my seat that I wanted, that I've been having, wasn't available for the whole weekend package, so to speak. So I had to kind of pick and choose, and what I picked and choose was today's convention and tomorrow's pay-per-view, and I took the night off last night from Dynamite.
Yeah, you could just watch it. Probably TiVo. You could watch. You can see Hangman Page bled like buckets. He hit Hardway accidentally, first from the mouth and then from the head. He was bleeding all over the place in that match. He's
a great wrestler. That's the thing. I don't mean to cut you off, Dr. Mike, but I get a little excited because you mentioned one of my favorite young wrestlers, Hangman Page, and I guess kind of going to what Dr. Mike said about 5 minutes ago. For me, and Evan knows this, all that I've said about WWE and their dealings with Saudi Arabia, funding the Trump administration in 2016 campaign, firing, as Evan points out on Facebook quite nobly, firing, 60 or 80 employees during the middle of a pandemic. When I watch WWE...
Oh, and don't forget the trash bag incident.
Yes.
Yeah, with Mickey James, right? Mickey James, yeah. But when I watch WWE, Russell, I feel guilty. I feel like I'm doing something that's against my moral ethics, and I'm doing it out of habit, and I'm doing it to serve the community of Mike Messier, subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel followers that want to know my takes. And the compromise I've made with myself and with the people that care about my opinion is I watch the WWE pay-per-views, and if something big comes up, or if there's a big request for me to state my opinion, as one of my subscribers said, "Hey, Mike, what do you think of these Ultimate Warrior docs?" Then I'll do the research and then I'll catch up. But as far as punishing myself like a nihilist and watching Monday Night Raw every week, I can't do it. I refuse to do it because we're all going to be dead at some point, and I don't want to die.
For yourself.
Well, thanks. I don't want to move on to the next life having watched Drew McIntyre do a promo about Bobby Lashley 15 times in 3 months. You know what I mean?
Evan used to talk about that with Cena and Orton matches. Very briefly, Ev, though, I've supplied and worked with both A&E and Vice since season 1, but particularly this year, and actually the A&E things, we finished up. They were all different production companies like 2 years ago. So my supplying them with photos of Hellwig for that Ultimate Warrior doc, and then Vice for this one, the dueling ones, I thought they both sucked to be. It's not so much their fault, but I don't think a lot of people are interested in this guy. He didn't have a lot to offer anybody. They didn't touch his alleged porn career. And then to have the dueling wives, you know, each one had, like, A&E had, since it's WWE Vince supported, had his last wife, who was sort of had the blinders on to all this shit that he was doing, drugs, sex, Republican Trump bullshit. And then the other one had the wife before that, who was also like oblivious to everything. Oh, you know, life was so wonderful until he got into the drugs and started cheating on me. And they were both Dullsville. So I'm hoping the murders in the Grizzly and Jake Roberts family, Grizzly Smith, Jake Roberts family, and are better, because this was a week of 2 documentaries that blew.
Well, oddly, go ahead.
Let me just throw this out there. WWE has been around 60 or so years. 60 or so, Dr. Mike?
50s, yeah, late 50s.
Okay. So why would the fans even be on the side of the ruthless corporation that has a 60-year head start instead of the new kid on the block, you know, that's trying to do something different and exciting? I mean, I don't quite grasp that. And
well, it's Stockholm Syndrome in a lot of ways.
You said it.
You know, people have been captive and held captive and told that this is what they're supposed to like. And for some people, that is what mixes with their love of wrestling, is the idea that it's brainless for them and that they love being told what to think. And they like being told by Vince McMahon what to think, just like they like being told by Trump.
If you look at what Meltzer and the others that look at, any of us can look at it. It doesn't have to be Meltzer or Keller or Alvarez. But you look at the ratings, and WWE has lost all of the 24 to 34-year-olds, or the 18 to 34-year-old audience. AEW wins that handily every week for their slot. They just came or were listed by Multi-Channel News, which is one of the Bibles of TV publication, as the stickiest cable show of the week, meaning had the most viewer interest. So they have that. WWE, even the NXT, which I love, great show that doesn't have Vince's dirty fingerprints all over it, skews older. Even NXT skews older. And before I forget, I want to dedicate the show to a legend, Tony Marino, who we just lost, I think, this morning or last night. Total legend in Florida, but also more importantly for the Sheik's territory in Detroit. And where Mike is,
and Mark Eaton also just died earlier today. Mark Eaton for the center for the Utah Jazz,
and Gavin McLeod, the Love Boat,
and Gavin McLeod. So celebrities die in 3.
Never wrestled. But Mike is so lucky because Right now, it feels to me, since I lived the territories, I traveled, went to nearly every single one of them besides Japan and Mexico and Europe and junk. Um, he is right there where Court Bauer's home base is for MLW, which is an exciting young promotion. And a lot of those guys, MJF and Tony Schiavone, got revitalized there, and Pillman Jr., all in MLW. Mike, did you get to go to any of the MLW shows there in Florida?
I haven't been to MLW yet. I think I actually applied for a job there a while ago, but maybe I should apply again just to let them know I still care. And I haven't watched a whole lot of MLW, but I watched some of the Opera Cup. I think it was a Pillman, Harry Smith, Davey Boy Smith's son, Opera Cup match, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that they had the Von Erichs, Kevin's sons. And I know they have a lot of talent. The female Latina manager, I believe.
Yes, De La Renta.
Yes.
Good heel.
I'm in Jacksonville. I'm actually I lived 20 minutes from Daly's place where they're doing all the AEW stuff. So that's been my kind of territory. I did think that Russell made a good point that back in the day, if you were, say, a world-class championship wrestling fan, you might be cheering for Kerry Von Erich. And if you were in the St. Louis territory, you might be cheering for Crusher Blackwell. And if you were in Memphis, it might be Jerry Lawler or Austin Idol. So I think that point is kind of cool. These days, you kind of have to pick your territory. For most fans, they wouldn't have the geography that I do of being so close to AEW. But most fans can say, well, I like all these guys on NXT because I'm familiar with them. Or maybe they're from like your independent promotion. Tommaso Ciampa is a guy that I spoke to many times because I was doing commentary for Top Rope Promotions in Massachusetts. We had Tommaso Ciampa. We had, oh man, I feel Ring of
Martinez was there. She Mercedes Martinez.
Oh yeah, she was there.
She's great.
Yep, we had the guy from Ring of Honor. He was the champion, Vinny Marcellia, and I'm feeling bad. I'm drawing a blank on one of the Vinny's tag team partner often in Japan in Ring of Honor. Another guy with long hair, good wrestler. We had Biff Busick, who now wrestles as Oney Larkin. Biff Busick was a long-running champion in Top Rope Promotions. And a lot of these guys I had personal bonds with, and most of them have gone on not to AEW, but to NXT. But for me, like I said, and Evan knows this the best, and I've been interviewed by Vince Russo about it, I've been very outspoken about the WWE's politics. I don't like having politics mixed with pro wrestling. I feel that when a subscriber to the WWE network 3 or 4 years ago was paying their $10 a month, and eventually that money goes to Vince McMahon, and Vince McMahon and his wife spend that money to fund a political candidate, and that candidate happens to win, and they get rewarded with Linda McMahon having a political office. I find that to be a conflict of interest, that thou shalt separate pro wrestling and state. And I don't like when my wrestling mixes with politics, either on the left, right, or in the middle. And I feel that Vince broached the unspoken trust that wrestling and politics shall not mix. So therefore, AEW, and I know that the counterpoint would be that the Khans or the father Khan gave $1 million to the Trump administration as well. That's been reported. But for me, $1 million is 1/60th in the 60 million. I believe it was reported that Vince gave, or maybe it was 600. I thought it was 60. I don't know.
You remember, that was his primary fundraiser when she quit her post as small business administration head.
Right. For a couple that put all the territories out of business, now she's funding the small business head, right? I mean, tell that to Crockett and Gagne and all the promoters that we loved. Guys, I just thought it might be fun as a visual. If you want to see some photos that I've taken, not to say that the quality of Dr. Mike's, but this is from the Tower of Doom. You might recall that 1988 Great American Bash, July 10th. That's Kevin Sullivan, I believe, trying to get himself up the Tower of Doom. And I took that from the audience. This was from an April 1988 Baltimore Arena. You see kind of the Fantastics doing a dozy-do with the Midnight Express, the Bobby and Stan version. Kind of a nice shot.
Yeah.
and we were both speaking of Brian Pillman, Dr. Mike, and myself. And here's the original Pillman launching. You might remember that match from the '89 Bash, but that's Brian Pillman, the original senior, launching on top of Wild Bill Irwin. And unfortunately, they're both. Is Wild Bill still alive? I know his brother passed away.
Yeah,
okay,
Wild
that's
Bill
good.
is still alive.
His brother passed away.
We can almost see these photos, Mike.
Well,
they tell you, you look at the audience, there's all these details Mike has in his shot that they're fun to look at. The audience, their intent on the action. They're not holding up signs or being Pavlov's dogs, just marking out or orgasming at the...
Nobody owns a wrestling belt. You know, back then, nobody else owned a replica belt.
I saw a guy walking around today with an elite belt, like the Kenny Omega Young Bucks guys. This guy had like a customized belt that said the elite. I always wonder about these fans that go to conventions or they go to live wrestling shows and they carry a belt. Are they defending the belt? Like, can other fans approach them and give them a small package?
They're defending their virginity.
Yes. Their continued, ongoing, long-term chronic virginity.
Yeah.
So, so Mike, can you tell us how you got started in professional wrestling, so our fans can figure out how you got involved in wrestling and what your role was?
Well, like everybody else, I started off as a fan, and what really hooked me at the time, I'll be aging myself a little bit, was guys like the Wild Samoans, Afa and Sika, Rocky Johnson. When I grew up in the suburbs of Virginia, Special Delivery Jones was actually a main event guy at the Capitol Center, which is kind of interesting. Like,
well, we were just talking about Johnny Rods the other week, so that's right in that whole wheelhouse area.
Yeah, it was interesting that SD Jones and Rocky Johnson, my dad took me to see them fight Crippler Ray Stevens and Playboy Buddy Rose at February 15th, 1983. And Morocco and Backlund fought one of those matches where Backlund was disqualified for bleeding too much, but he kept the title. And this was in the infamous snowstorm of the Beltway at that time. And my dad, me, and a friend got there in my dad's Volkswagen Rabbit. So credit to my father for getting us there. One of those memories. But I think what hooked me, and it's sad, guys, when I get so irate with the WWE, I started off as a WWF fan. But then, like many, when I started finding Georgia Championship Wrestling and guys like Buzz Sawyer and that Power Slam, and somebody say something about Tommy Rich and the Road Warriors, especially on Georgia Championship Wrestling, the young Road Warriors, it started to feel like there was a certain realness to the NWA territories. And going up to Rhode Island in the summer, where somehow we could get this Boston channel fuzzy of the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. And even my sister, who pretty much hated pro wrestling, she was quoting Kevin Von Erich when he was saying to Michael Hayes, "This is not a battle between Texas and Florida. This is a battle between good and scum." So, I mean, these are the things that kind of hook into your memory banks, and they form your brain patterns. And myself as a writer, as Evan knows, I've published my first novel here, A Distance from Avalon, When the Dying and the Dead Reunite. But, some of my creative writing, I'm sure, was influenced by Eddie, Matt Brock, who was a fictional writer for the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines, and Craig Peters and Stuart M. Sachs and Peter King. And those wrestling magazines, the after mags, as they called them, they were a lot of fun. Like, that was a whole world unto itself, on top of what you saw on TV. The literary side of pro wrestling. Now we have a lot of books, a lot of autobiographies, by wrestlers. But I'm telling you, those golden days of the 1980s for the after mags, for me, that was just as big a part of it as watching stuff on TV.
When did you figure out, though, Mike, that most everything in there, including the so-called interviews, were all a work? And I worked.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Sorry to get you off, but I wanted to sell the punch. When did I figure out that those articles were
pretty quickly?
here's the thing. I guess I did it for a long time because I didn't think that everything I was watching on TV was legit, but I thought that if they were actually had an interview with Dusty Rhodes, or say it was Dusty Rhodes, I thought that they would actually sit down and Dusty was giving them kayfabe answers in order for them to publish it. I didn't think that just Bill Apter or Stu Sachs or whoever was coming up with the whole thing. You know what I mean? But I think that those articles and those photographs, I mean, if you look at the Supercards 1986 edition of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, where you've got Hogan and Bundy in the cage, and you've got the Crockett Cup, and you've got the AWA had a big show with Vern Gagne coming out of retirement to team with, I think, his son against Bruiser Brody and Nord the Barbarian in a cage match. I'm going by memory, by the way. If you look at those magazines, I would compare that to any graphic novel or any magazine, Sports Illustrated. I'd put the Apter mags and some of the other Wrestling Review had a great cover with Bob Backlund, like a purple cover, and Bob Backlund holding the WWF title belt. I mean, that was some quality publishing, in my opinion.
So, Mike, you mentioned Stockholm Syndrome, and Dr. Mike mentioned Pavlov's dogs. So let's talk a little about the psychology of all of this. So you'll say something critical about the WWE, and within seconds, the fans are turning on you. And I've heard people go so far as to say, quote, Vince is my hero. He's an American hero. WWE is my religion. Okay? So you are setting these people off. And my question would be, why are they so obsessive? Why does it make you their enemy or whatnot by, talking from your heart and giving legitimate criticisms? Because I've lived through all of this, and I've just cut it down dramatically because I'll just have I'm older than you. I'll have a stroke one day. My head will be down on the keyboard, and my last words will be ASDF JKL semicolon, because my head will be down on the keyboard and I'll be dead from battling some of these idiots. But anyway, you seem to relish it, though. I think you enjoy going toe-to-toe with these guys. So tell us about that whole scenario. Because when I think of you, I always think of you, stating your mind and putting yourself out there and really holding your ground with a lot of people that disagree.
If I had to, thanks, Evan. I mean, if I had to pinpoint it, it was 2017. I want to say May or June of 2017. I was in a group called the Cult of Kayfabe wrestling group on Facebook. And there was a discussion because the Big Show had just been kind of speared through the side of a cage by Braun Strowman the night before on Raw. And so people were kind of debating, and the word was that this was the end of Paul White's career. And someone said, well, he's had a great career, and if this is the end of Paul White, then so be it. Salute, great career. And I chimed in, you know what? He hasn't had a great career. He's had a terribly disappointing career. And people, what are you talking about? He had the WWF title. He did this, he did that. I said, well, one of the things I remember about Paul White and the Big Show on WWF or WWE television is getting on his knees and begging John Laurinaitis to keep his job. And I have seen a clip of the Big Show wearing a diaper and pretending to be the Baby New Year. And I remember him losing in a boxer versus wrestler match to Floyd Mayweather Jr. And I remember him losing in a sumo match to Akko Bono, who never wrestled for the WWE ever after the sumo match at WrestleMania. So when I think of Paul White, the Big Show, I think of a 7-foot-tall, 500-pound disappointment, and someone that did better in 2 years in WCW than he did in 20 in WWE. And so when I started writing this stuff, I said, man, I'm writing a lot. Maybe I should just cut a video. And I was very slow to the smartphone game. Like, I was years behind in the smartphone game. But I picked up the smartphone and I cut a little promo. And I said, well, what do I do with this? I said, well, I guess I'll put it on YouTube. And I hadn't really been doing YouTube a whole lot. And that video, which, I've changed the title a few times, but it's still on YouTube. It's Big Show. How do you waste a 7-foot-tall, 500-pound giant? Ask Vince McMahon. And I uploaded the video to Cult of Kayfabe in the comments as my reply. And people were like, what are you doing? Why are you making a video? Why can't you just write? I said, watch the video, see what you think. And immediately there was some hate and some disagreement. And then I cut another video. And then we were off to the races. And it is funny because Dr. Mike, mentioned Ultimate Warrior. It's funny because although my political leanings are much, much different than apparently the Warriors were 10 or 12 years ago, I actually got along with the Ultimate Warrior when I met him the one time at a fan event in Boston. And I actually was inspired by the Ultimate Warrior's 2011-2012 campaign of motivational videos, not his political videos and not even his wrestling matches. I was never a big fan of Ultimate Warrior's wrestling. I thought he had 3 great matches: WrestleMania 5 against Rude, 6 against Hogan, 7 against Macho Man, and the SummerSlam 92 against Savage was also quite good. But the Ultimate Warrior 2011, 2012 gym videos, motivational videos, those type of videos that Ultimate Warrior was doing, his kind of ill-fated Warrior University that lasted for a few months, he wasn't talking about politics. He was talking about weightlifting, and he was talking about guys taking care of themselves and stuff like that. I got into that. And so once he passed away in 2014, I feel like some of his energy of not putting up with crap from people, especially when in regards to pro wrestling, I feel like that energy kind of remanifested into me in my own unique way. I'm not telling guys about gyms and stuff like that, but I am encouraging. This is what I do that's different, guys. I will tell the WWE fans especially, stop watching WWE. My friend Joe Cronin, who does a great podcast, almost nightly, the JD from New York, Vince Russo, none of these other guys, and I like Vince Russo too, but none of these guys will just flat out tell WWE fans, stop watching. Limit yourself. You're driving yourselves nuts. You're watching Monday Night Raw with the expectation that it's going to suck, and then it does suck. And then you get upset about it, and then you tweet about it, and you Facebook about it, and you say Raw sucked again. Then you go into a podcast, like a Joe Cronin or somebody else, and you vent to the host how much Raw sucked. I said, I go to a movie on Monday night. I'll go to the movie theater and see a movie. I'll go to the beach and walk. And once a month, I will give WWE an allotment of my time for their pay-per-view, and all the storylines that I missed throughout the month, I'll catch up on in a nice 3 or 3.5 hour deep dive for that month. And I'm saner, I'm calmer, and I feel like I'm doing better, and I'm trying to liberate some of these. I call them McMarks. And if I'm being a jerk, I'll call them idiot McMarks, that they feel that they need to watch WWE out of some type of loyalty. And some of this stuff is because, hey, someone might say, me and my dad used to watch WWF Raw, and then my dad died 5 years ago. Well, I'll say, you know what? Your dad wouldn't want you to suffer through bad Monday Night Raw. If you have to, go to YouTube or go to Peacock and watch some old wrestling. Like I always encourage people, Evan, as you guys know, if you haven't watched Starrcade 83 and 85, don't call yourself a pro wrestling fan. If you haven't watched Super Clash 3 with Von Erich versus Lawler, don't call yourself an educated pro wrestling fan. I don't want to hear your opinion if you haven't watched some of these classic shows that are right there at your fingertips. Why are you watching WWE Main Event whenever that's on and at your fingertips from the catalog?
Yeah. So I stopped watching Raw in 2017. It was my 2018 New Year's resolution because I know one day I'll be on my deathbed and I'll have squandered all those Monday nights. So I have not watched Raw since 2017, and I haven't watched SmackDown. I'm like you. I'll turn on a WWE pay-per-view because generally there's 3 good matches out of the 17 or whatnot. And but it's not a necessity to watch something that's upsetting you. And I posted today on Facebook, since April 3rd, I've watched 57 movies. 57 movies. If you have no other interest but wrestling, there's something probably wrong or obsessive. And when I see people posting 3 a.m., they're posting, I miss Chris Benoit. It's Chris's birthday. I mean, there's something wrong. I mean, just wrong, okay, mentally. If you're thinking about Chris Benoit at 3 a.m., I'm sorry. And, and another thing while I'm venting, and I'll make it quick, I'm not big on this speaking ill of the dead. They'll pull a wrestler out of their ass and they'll go, they'll use the word hate, which isn't normal either. They'll go, I hate Chief Jay Strongbow. I hate this guy. Ric Flair, I hate. And I'm like, there's something very wrong if you hate a professional wrestler. I could understand you not enjoying somebody's work, but to hate them and write a 1,000-word manifesto on why you hate them, I think you've crossed the line into obsessive. What do you think, buddy? You've been quiet.
Well, this sort of thing is fostered by the kind of quality of what we have, what we're watching. I think the fact that the other day, I think I did tune into a Raw a couple weeks ago, and from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, I probably saw about 12 minutes of actual wrestling, that wasn't broken up by commercials, wasn't broken up by, showing what happened the week before, an interview of something else. And unfortunately, we have such a large group now of people that have gotten used to watching that as what wrestling really is. They've forgotten what the shows, what Mike was talking about, Super Clash 3, what kind of matches made up Super Clash 3. There are barely any interviews, when you see Super Clash 3. The interviews are maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then the match starts and you get about 20 minutes worth of wrestling and about 2 minutes worth of interviews. Now you get 20 minutes worth of interviews and about 2 minutes worth of wrestling. And people's standards as to what makes a good wrestling show has really fallen apart. And I think that's where we're having so much difficulty with the next generation of wrestling fans. As you see, they're not watching WWE as much as Mike Leno said. They're trying to watch AEW. They're trying to watch things that have got more actual action going on, as opposed to Talk Festival and reruns and skits that go absolutely nowhere.
Comedy that isn't funny.
Yeah, that's what the WWE has tried to cater now more than wrestling.
Well, that's
and it's just awful.
Vince's sense of humor. I want to ask Mike if he watches any Impact, because look at the schedule of wrestling. If you can't tape or just pause and go watch a movie or something else and then come back to it, depending on what your DVR is like. That's kind of what I do. I'm blessed in California. DirecTV, I get all the shows 3 hours early, East Coast time. So I can buzz through Raw 15 to 20 minutes, just go to the good parts. But Tuesday is NXT.
You don't need 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah. Wednesday A&E, Thursday Dark Side, and all day of Impact. And I'm going to get back to Impact in a second. Friday, SmackDown. Saturday, though, has MLW, depending on where you are, Ring of Honor shows. There's Lucha on your local, CMLL, Lucha. We don't quite have AAA back yet. And then the Sundays is the A&E documentary, 3 hours of that stuff. But there's also Tuesdays, there's NWA, Billy Corgan's NWA when they get back to it. So on the Impact thing, it's almost 12 hours of Impact on the Access channel. They have a 4 to 5 hour original TNA pay-per-view to start like at noon California time. And those are ones I never watched, or bought, most of them. And so I can sort of fast forward through those. Then they have a pre-show hour before Impact starts, 2 hours of Impact, and then sort of a post-Impact show, which is usually old TNA matches, best of somebody, Drew Galloway, when he was called that there. And then now they're going to have a knockouts whole hour after that. So it's almost 12 hours. So I want to ask Mike if he's watching this, and if he has, the stupidest thing of the whole week. And I like a lot of aspects of Impact, but during the before the Impact show, that's before the 2 hours of Impact, they have this guy doing Iceman Intel. And Intel is supposed to be you're giving out information or intelligence or something. So this guy goes, I can't tell you who, I can't tell you where or when. He doesn't tell you shit. Why do they give this guy 5 minutes every week? Whose relative is this motherfucker?
Well, if I'll answer the question, Dr. Mike, and I'll preface it by saying, TNA, Impact Wrestling. I went to the Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle six sides cage match. I was there. I talked to Dixie Carter briefly at that show, and once again, I tried to get work with the Impact Wrestling or TNA at the time. I talked to Terry Taylor on the phone. I sent him my storyline that I proposed to their company, and he was polite. But what he said, he gave me the cliche line of, "You're like the square peg in the round hole." He said, "You can obviously write for wrestling, but Jeff Jarrett's writing most of our stuff right now." So I didn't know how to
Can you
take
tell
that.
us what that storyline was?
Well, I don't want to give it away because, to be honest, and thank you for asking, but that's a storyline that I would still love to pitch to Impact Wrestling. Not Impact, actually AEW Wrestling, because the reason is that the storyline that I wrote could work for any promotion as long as they had 20 or more wrestlers on their roster. I could make it work. Because I'll say this, it's a tournament storyline, and it's a tournament unlike anything that's ever been done in professional wrestling.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. That brings people back to the competition and the idea that there's maybe a title or something that's worth competing for, which is one thing Evan is always talking about. No, nobody cares about anything anymore. There isn't a storyline that features something that guys are fighting for that they care about. And your movies are no good when you don't care about the plot. Your characters have no pretense as to why they're actually there or what they're actually trying to do. And wrestling has lost its pretense as far as, titles are meaningless. Titles don't mean what they used to, and guys don't focus their feuds around titles as much as they do shtick.
Right. It's called stakes, and whether it's in acting or in pro wrestling, stakes. What's at stake? And this tournament storyline that I devised would be a different way to get to a familiar ending. To go to Dr. Mike's question about current modern day, say the last 2 or 3 years of Impact, I've had some issues with it, and I'll tell you the issues, and maybe you have a counter. I wasn't a fan of Joey Ryan. I had videos when I talked about Joey Ryan disgracing the sport. When I lived in Rhode Island, Joey Ryan wrestled at a free exhibition show at a sandwich place literally 5 minutes from where I was, but I couldn't get myself to go, and I didn't want to go. I said, if they're booking Joey Ryan, I have no interest in seeing this crotch flip nonsense. And
I saw Joey Ryan wrestle in a church, and I was watching the priest watching him. That was more entertaining.
Well,
seriously, I'm not making this up.
I believe you. I just couldn't. I couldn't sign off on the whole Joey Ryan crotch flip stuff. And when Mick Foley flopped like a fish to sell that thing in some show somewhere, I didn't like that either. And I called both of them out. I did a video about that. And I tweeted back and forth with Joey Ryan, I think in the summer of 18, and I suggested to Joey, as we're twittering back and forth, I said, maybe you should you should go to war with your own dick flip. Like, you should disavow the dick flip and go to war with it. And Joey Ryan says, yeah, you're full of great ideas, being very swarmy. And a year and a half later, he's doing that, pretty much that same idea. But when Joey, my basic interesting segments on Impact. No offense to Tessa Blanchard, I think she's an outstanding women's wrestler, but to me, she's a 5'2", outstanding women's athlete, and let her wrestle other outstanding women wrestlers. When they're having her beat Brian Cage, who's 6'5" and bigger than Lex Luger or the Warlord, why is she beating Brian Cage and then beating Sami Callihan for their title? Why is Sami Callihan a guy who takes a baseball bat, smashes Eddie Edwards, who's a real nice guy, in the eye socket with a baseball bat? Why does he get rewarded with a contract and a title run? How come with Impact Wrestling they build stars, whether it's Maria Kanellis and Mike Bennett coming in for a cup of coffee, or Cody Rhodes and Brandy Rhodes coming in for a cup of coffee, or Alberto Del Rio coming in for 2 or 3 cups of coffee. They build these people up, and the next thing you know, they're gone. These things that were happening in Impact Wrestling maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it left a sour taste in my mouth, and I couldn't. Once again, you had me with Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle in the cage. You even had me with Hardcore Justice 2010 when they had Raven and Tommy Dreamer do a pay-per-view match that I thought was quite epic in its storytelling with 2 guys at the tail end of their career. But when you start bringing in talent, hot-shotting Impact Wrestling with certain big names, and then they're gone, and they leave with the title or Austin Aries.
Bad Bunny. Ahem.
Well, my point is, you asked about Impact Wrestling. I'm telling you why my kibitz is with Impact Wrestling, and that's why I'm pretty much these days I'm watching AEW, and I watch my steady supply of old school wrestling on YouTube. I'm getting more into the AWA things. Like AWA had a bunch of big shows in 82 and 83. I'm always watching some type of wrestling, like Lucha Libre. I'm getting more interested in that. I've written a feature screenplay, American Luchador. I mean, Evan Ginsberg with his producing credits, 350 Days, and The Wrestler. Evan Ginsberg should read the American Luchador, The Dream of Lobo Fuego. That's a screenplay that has money written all over it. Thanks. I'll send it to you.
Mike, this sort of brings me to another question that I wanted to get to you with, which is, why do you think there's such a reticence by the WWE and maybe the other feds to have wrestling guys write and book wrestling action right now? The WWE has hired just about every kind of writer that you can get, except really traditional wrestling story people, like someone like yourself, to do these storylines, and they keep failing. And they just keep repeating it and keep hiring guys from, soap operas and from comedy shows and from, writing riddles for Dixie Cups. I don't know where they get
Freddie Prinze Jr. worked for them for a while.
Yeah, but
that
why are they not...
African American comic, I think they had 2 of them. One, and Patrice O'Neill, who passed away, who used to be on the Opie and Anthony show regularly, and even Bubba the Love Sponge, he was part of their staffers. That's the same mentality they take with announcers, and when they put out job apps on monster.com or whatever they're putting out there, no experience, no history of watching wrestling required. And when they get in wrestling folks or people that grew up, loved it, did it the proper way, they sour on that because I think they want to just brainwash them and meld them into whatever people can sit there and have Vince talk in their headphone. That's what they want, or that's what Vince wants, and everything all revolves around him. December
13th, 2007, I had my job interview in Titan Tower for the creative writing team, and I was quite shocked to even get that far because I had initially applied in 2002. And here it was 5 years later, I'm actually in Titan Tower. And, what I saw, guys, was I saw that this was 2007, and the big stars at the time were Batista, Edge, John Cena, and Randy Orton. And I'm walking around Titan Tower for not randomly, but I'm going where they tell me to go. And everything I see is Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. All the action figures, the stuffed dolls, it's all Steve Austin and The Rock. And this was, 5 or 6 or 7 years after both of those guys were gone. And, for me, it is frustrating and it's depressing that Vince McMahon, in my opinion, seems to be a self-hating Southerner. He's from North Carolina. He had a tough childhood. I can recognize and appreciate that and feel for him. But he seems to be a self-hating Southerner. He seems to be a self-hating pro wrestling promoter. For 30 years, he's been telling us he doesn't do pro wrestling. He does sports entertainment. Well, if you're a pro wrestling fan, then don't watch WWE because it's sports entertainment. And I've never heard a kid say, I want to grow up one day and be a sports entertainer. I've heard kids say they want to be a pro wrestler. I've heard people look at me, and I'm a big guy, and they say, wow, you look like a pro wrestler, or you could be a pro wrestler. But I've never heard anyone say to someone, wow, you're a big guy, you could be a sports entertainer. It's Vince McMahon, for whatever reason, he hates the fact that he's a natural-born pro wrestling promoter. He wants to be something that he's not. Well, Vince, the WBF failed. Okay. The XFL on your watch failed twice. You really haven't made many good movies, and your money funded a president who basically called for a treasonous riot at the Capitol building. So, Vince, stick to wrestling, because every time you try to do something else, you fail and you lead to people's deaths. I mean, you could say that the money that WWE subscribers put into Vince McMahon's pocket, that he put into Donald Trump's pocket, led to the death of, was it 5 or 6 people on January 6th at the Capitol building? That's reality. That's reality, Vince. So stick to wrestling, because that's what you're good at, and it doesn't lead to anyone's death.
Don't leave out IcoPro or Owen Hart or the steroid trials in '92 or the Ring Boy scandals around that time.
Have you noticed that you try to find any evidence of Mel Phillips on what used to be the WWE Network, now the Peacock situation, and you can't find Mel Phillips? I don't know if they edited out the storyline that Mel was involved with the Junkyard Dog and Terry Funk, because Mel was actively involved in that storyline, and I think they had a Saturday Night Main Event match, and interestingly enough, in my YouTube research or just enjoyment, I found an old Piper's Pit, and the guest on the Piper's Pit was Iron Mike Sharp. And at some point, I think Piper is inviting Mark Sharp to like break bricks, like a kung fu guy would break, bricks or break wood with his arm. And Roddy Piper says, "Let me get my producers out here." Well, the producers come out. It's Terry Garvin, I believe, Mel Phillips, and a young ring boy who turned out to be, unfortunately, a young man that would grow up to commit suicide after the ring boy scandal.
Ugh.
So that's real deal stuff. That's not a joke.
And the fans hate you for bringing up any of this.
Well, Evan, to answer your question from before, Evan, why do the fans hate me, or why do they get upset, or why do they piss and groan when I come in? And not all of them. I mean, guys like Shane McKenna, who came out to Florida. We went to a AEW show, and Shane runs the Wrestling Fans Facebook group. And Shane calls me the head of the table, the tribal chief of the Wrestling Fans Facebook group, and Frank Tadaro and other wrestling, and like yourself, Evan, and there's other gentlemen who like what I have to say, and the reason is because I hold up the mirror of truth, the reflection of reality. And sometimes the scariest thing you can see is your own reflection. So when I say to these McMark idiots, and I say, why are you upset with WWE for presenting you a boring, listless 3-hour Raw, when that was the same thing that happened last week? It's the same thing that's been happening since 2017. Why aren't you upset with yourself that you tuned in and watched it?
Let me throw this out there. I have a friend who's a licensed psychologist. And I actually asked him, I said, why do people use the word love when they refer to a Donald Trump or a Vince McMahon? Billionaires who, do what they have to do to stay billionaires. And he actually said to me, he believes it's, quote, daddy issues. He feels that, a lot of folks, their dads were cold to them. Their dads were not perfect. And in comparison to a Donald Trump or a Vince McMahon, maybe daddy wasn't that bad.
They better ask DJ TJ and Eric Trump about how they've been sort of pushed aside, or even Tiffany Trump. I'd like to see what Mike has to say also about the ballless Republicans in the House that for whatever reason now don't want to have the commission. They don't want the January 6th investigate. I'm sure Mike has some great comments there, almost akin to what he was just talking about a moment ago.
Well, I do, and it's this is the thing. If we don't, I wish, whether it's Republican, Democrat, Independent, but the politicians have to say, they have to think, in my opinion, don't just think about today and next week and your own reelection situation. Think about 20 years from now, 30 years from now, your kids. If they grow up with this jaded view on ethics that you have to keep the company line, you have to keep the party line, because the most important thing is that our guy gets into office or our lady gets into office. If that's what it's come down to, and Joe Rogan uses the term tribalism a lot, if tribalism trumps ethics, then we're in trouble, because it makes you really feel. And I did a video the other day, guys, and I was actually at all places Disney World, and I did a video where I basically said to my subscribers, that subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel, at some point, I'm getting to the point where the environment is so screwed up, our social economics are so screwed up, or the way that we treat each other is screwed up. At some point, I'm just encouraging my subscribers to look out for themselves.
Mike froze up there for a second.
Uh-oh.
Buddy, add something.
Yeah, it might be the Republicans listening in on the conversation and
to censor Mike.
they sent the black helicopters are on their way. Oh no!
About he was going to give us some angles and haps from today's AEW Fanfest. Mike,
before the black helicopters arrive, Mike.
Yeah, they cut me off. They got me.
Yeah.
I was on the soapbox, but the AEW Fanfest. Dr. Mike, and people are if they do go to subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel, I have some of the clips. They had the highlight for me, get this, at a wrestling convention was actually wrestling. They did tape a dark episode, and they had 4 matches, and I did take clips of those matches. They had the Guns, Billy Gunn, who still looks great. I think he's age 45 or whatever he is, but Billy Gunn was still in great shape. And I think he was actually with his younger son, and that kid looks just like Billy Gunn in the face. It was really kind of interesting. It wasn't the son that we've seen the more of. It was the other son. There was a women's match, Red Velvet, and she wrestled a match that was pretty good. And Jungle Boy wrestled one of Bear Country. That was the highlight for me. I actually sat on the floor and had a really good seat, and so got some good angles for my clips. Here's one thing I didn't like about the AEW Fanfest, not to put it down, but I'll just be honest with you. The first thing they did, they started off really slow. They had Paul White and the librarian guy, Peter Avalon, and one of the bald guys, like the Young Bucks friend, the bald guy.
Right.
And they did they played Dungeons and Dragons for about an hour and a half. And they did like a recorded podcast. And even Orange Cassidy was there, kind of out of character. Like he was dressed as Orange Cassidy, but he was speaking normally. And I had to get up and leave, but when I came back, it was still going on. And I think the wrestlers were literally sitting there playing D&D and kind of doing like a pseudo podcast of them playing Dungeons and Dragons. And this was too meta. This was, as Jim Cornette says, a hat on top of a hat. This was too nerdish for me.
I think even Andy Kaufman would have said, "What the heck's going on?"
Yeah, I mean, I've got a tattoo of Brian Pillman on my leg, and I'm sitting here thinking that these guys are too nerdy for me. You know what I mean? And I couldn't deal with the wrestlers playing D&D for an hour and a half. But they did have some good things. Like I said, the highlight of the wrestling convention for me was the actual wrestling. Imagine that. But it was nice to see everyone was in kind of a calm mood. The fans, the AEW fans today, to me, maybe it was the heat. And I think a lot of it is that we didn't really know what to expect. But there was like a very quiet, calm thing. And also, just like everywhere else, we're still in transition. You know, we haven't been encouraged to socialize for a year and a half. Florida has been more liberal with that than other states. But, you know, interesting use of words. But I think people are still trying to get back into that thing of how do you talk to strangers in public? You know what I mean? Like we're still getting used to that.
Do people still shake hands, or is that done with?
I shook somebody's hand last night, and it was almost shocking to do it, you know, because a lot of times it's fist bumps and maybe a pat on the shoulder. But somebody offered their hand to me last night at a coffee house, and I shook their hand. And but I think a lot of it is just fist bumps. I'll say this: there wasn't a whole lot of masking today. You know, here in Florida, you know, it's kind of like do what you want at this point. So to get into the AEW Fanfest today, the ticket said masks encouraged, but they were not required. So I've been double vaccinated. I got my vaccinations over 6 weeks ago, and knock on wood, I'm fine. Thank you. So everything, I thought it was a fun time. The tickets were $40, and did I get my $40 worth? I'd say so. It was a good time.
Did they not have Colt Cabana do his $5 wrestling or the very cool stuff he does, even his podcast, which he's done at FanFest before? He'll sit and interview people. He'll tear apart somebody's shitty match or something.
No, he wasn't doing that. I think he might have been part of the D&D thing, to be honest with you, but it was bad. Like it was like not even, botchamania bad. It was just like boring bad. Like fall asleep heat. Like wrestlers playing D&D. I can't write that off. And they were building towards this is what I guess I would have done. They had a weigh-in at 5:15. The convention was listed as 12 to 5, but then the weigh-in with some of the matches wasn't starting till 5:15. But by the time the dark thing was taped, I had to leave. I was hungry. I was sick of being around other wrestling fans. I just had to go somewhere else. And so I called it a day around 4 o'clock. But I think I got my money's worth, and I think that they did. It was a nice, calm presentation. Probably the highlight, if people go to my YouTube channel, is they had an artifacts exhibition where they had like a nice tribute to Brody Lee. They had like Brody Lee's jacket, his big white jacket, a nice original painting of Brody. They had a Dusty Rhodes, the Malcolm Dream Dusty Rhodes bull rope. They had some artifacts from like the TNT title that was smashed up by Brody Lee. They had different belts on display and nameplates for belts. And I did a pretty good job of taping that stuff, and it's on my Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. And I think for the money that people put the $40, I don't think anyone left unsatisfied. I think it was a nice time.
Well, speaking of, please tell our fans how they can follow you and subscribe to your channel. And if you have anything that you're promoting right now, please let us know, because we're right up at the end of the show here.
Well, MikeMessier.com, MikeMessier, and then Amazon. Beyond wrestling, as Evan knows, I'm a writer. I make films. Disregard the Vampire Mike Messier documentary has recently won its 11th award from the Tabloid Witch Awards, which is always nice. Sorry for the reflection. But people can go to Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. There's Ox Baker, one of the boys. Also, he's in 350 Days by Evan Ginsberg. But my Bob Backlund interview and a lot more on Subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel and MikeMessier.com.
Well, you've been a great guest. We'd love to have you on again when you have something else to promote, or anytime you want to gab away on a Saturday evening. Love to have you again, and really appreciate your time this week.
Thanks, Russell. Thanks, Evan. And thanks, Dr. Mike.
Hey, Mike,
all right, everyone. We'll see you all next week.
When we go off.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll see you all next week. Good night, everyone.
Okay.